Welcome to week 11 of Dr. Stone, the science anime that's about stone and sometimes not about stone, but mostly about stone. So this show is kind of going on at a spectacular pace now. So and last week we had the discovery where they were trying to get the medicine to Ruri, but it occurred to them that through some sociological, complications that they might not even be able to get it to her even if they wanted to, just because her sister is the only one that can keep Magma from winning the grand bout and marrying her, but of course they can't allow that to happen. You can't just wed your own sister even in this society, so they have to have some other person marry her, but because she got so sick it was postponed, so they're going to have another grand bout to determine who eventually marries the priestess. And the significance of that episode was it was the first time that we really got to see the more sociological implications of what the society has been up to, because science is not the only thing that leads to human advancement. There's also cultural advancements and moral and ethical advancements. And in this time, it's still considered okay for you to have a giant battle to determine who ends up leading a village. And that may be okay in their time, but obviously Senku's not going to stand for something like that. But he has no choice but to play along, because he might have some input on the scientific side of things, but he has very little input on what happens in the non-scientific side of things, because it's their culture, it's their tradition. These things take a lot longer to change than just making up some new chemicals or whatever. So he has to go along with things, and their plan is to have Kohaku train up Kinro and Ginro to have them fight Magma in the grand bout, and hopefully have either one of them win, or maybe Kohaku win, they'll just get another postponement. And so they spent most of last episode doing that. And at the same time, Chrome and Senku were trying to get all these chemicals to make stuff that they needed for their science lab, which is how we get to this week. So this week, the big discovery this week, every week there's something new and big. This week it's all about glass. Now glass is something we just take for granted in the modern day. And as someone who wears glasses, this episode particularly spoke to me, because if you've ever been a kid who couldn't see for a while and didn't realize you needed glasses, then it just so happened that you went to the eye doctor and he was like, oh, what is this? And you thought it was a B, but it turns out to be an F or an E or whatever. You can sympathize with Suika when she can't see at all. And in this culture, they call that the fuzzy disease, a fuzzy eye disease or whatever. And it just means that you can't see properly. And Senku makes a big point of telling Suika this when he discovers that she can't see properly, that it's not really a defect, it's not really a disease, it's just a minor inconvenience. And he says in the modern day, it doesn't even bother people at all. So it just so happens that one of the side effects of needing to make all these chemical substances to make the cure-all sulfa drug that they're going to give Ruri at some point in the future, you need chemical glassware to make that stuff. And Senku's obviously super into chemistry, so he would appreciate having a beaker or a test tube or a pipette or two. So their way of making this is to go and find this mountain which has all this quartz sand, which they then melt down. And they are able to make these glasses for Suika that let her see for the first time. And it was a pretty emotional moment when she found out that she could, has been missing out on so much this whole time. And when she eventually does get to see, it's really cool. It also so happens, we learn later on in the episode, that Kinro, the older of the two guard brothers, also has this fuzzy disease. And he can't see properly either. But of course, him being so prideful, he won't admit it to anybody. So he ends up just having to deal with it. And he's practicing with Kohaku to fight Magma later on, and he can't get the final strike right because he's too far away to see something, or it's just his vision is putting him at a disadvantage to something that he would normally be able to do if he was able to see. And we're reaching that stage in the first arc of the show. We're almost to episode 13, which is going to be the finale, I guess, when they go to the grand bout. We're reaching that stage where things are starting to slow down, and we're kind of starting to see more of that. We're reaching a point where they feel like they have to stop and tell you all the things that our characters have accomplished so far since coming to the village. So we get a little interlude from Mecha Senku, who tells us all about the iron furnace that they have, the glass blowing furnace that they have, the ramen stall that they have, the electricity generator that they have, and all these things that they've been able to accomplish over just the past 4 or 5 episodes. And it really brings into perspective how much Senku is able to do just because he has so much prior knowledge. He's even able to make a functioning spectacle lens for this little kid by giving her a very basic vision test, and then polishing the glass to the right thickness and shape, concave or convex, that she's able to see using it, which is really cool thinking about it. And as usual, the science comes fast and hard with this show. We learn about quartz sand, but really the spirit of this episode was all about the shokunin, the craftsman who's able to make the glass, because Senku's his only responsibility is the science part of things. So when he's able to do his part and he's able to get you the materials you need to work with, the first like 45 attempts they have at making anything resembling glass is just horrible, and they can't really do anything about it other than to just try and try again until Chrome realizes that they need a craftsman when Senku mentions it, and he goes to the village and kidnaps this old craftsman guy that they have who made all the kind of cool things like Kohaku's shield and the suspension bridge are all things that he made. So to Senku, this guy's like a old like Greek Archimedes or someone who before their time was able to make things purely through like innovation and trying again and again to make things that really shouldn't be possible in this era. Senku mentions that the shield that Kohaku has really kind of defies them having just stone tools. They don't even have metal tools yet. And he's still able to make something so cool and kind of effective because just through his ability to craft things. So when they bring him to their glass blowing furnace, they like show him the glass blowing, and he can't resist himself. He ends up just making all kinds of chemical stuff. Which then brings us to where we leave off at the end of the episode with Senku and Chrome and everyone having this fully stocked out science lab, and they're going to get more materials, the stuff that they need in order to make this sulfa drug, the antibiotic that's going to cure Ruri. That's like the grand arc, I think, for the first season of the show. I haven't read the manga at all. I've been tempted to again and again, but I'm not going to. I've promised myself that. Not going to read the manga, just going to stick with watching the anime because it does deliver on its premise so well. This is one of the things that I mention whenever I talk about a show, is that whether the show is good for weekly viewing, as in watching just one episode a week, or whether it's good for binge viewing. And I feel like Dr. Stone is one of those things where if there were 50 episodes out at any one time, I feel like I could watch it all in one day, just because it leads from episode to episode so, effortlessly, and they show us all these scientific things that, flow so well into one another. Like the iron instrument or the iron furnace is what led them to make the iron tube that allows them to blow the glass. And they're able to also use the iron furnace to burn obsidian, which produces this foam that they can use as insulation for the glass blowing furnace. And everything just leads so well into one another that it really just makes you want to keep watching to see where things will go from here. It's kind of like when you're playing an Age of Empires game or some kind of like base building game, when you've unlocked the first technology tree and how those lead to the next technology unlock so you can get, and it really just feels like that. And the show really plays into that when they have all these little acquired screens or achieved screens that show up whenever the gang gets something that is blatantly new that they've been working towards for some time. So this time we got glass. We gave glasses to Suika. And the show is just so effortless with these things that we really don't need any kind of action. If we were to just sit here with Senku, Chrome, Kohaku, and just build science things for the next 40 episodes, if it was like a 7-minute short edutainment show, that would be perfectly fine with me as well. I think that would work almost just as well. And that's basically like the core loop, the core attraction of the show for me are those scientific discoveries and how you can make something from nothing basically in a world that is completely inhospitable, to the point where I don't really even need the other stuff. And the show seems to be kind of aware of that as well, because we don't really see that much of Tsukasa. The only time we even saw him in the past, like 7-8 episodes, or not 7-8, maybe 4, 5, or 6 episodes, is when Asagiri again went back to tell him that Senku's completely dead. We don't know if Tsukasa believes that, and that kind of like the outside motivation to get things done is kind of unnecessary at this point, because Senku's so motivated in himself to just make all these scientific things. Even if he wasn't helping anybody, he would just probably do it anyway just to amuse himself, just to see how far he could get in a Robinson Crusoe type scenario. That being said, this dude's advancements make Robinson Crusoe look like a complete dumbass, because he was on that island for how many years and he didn't make anything? Okay, just some shade thrown at one of the most favorite classical heroes of all time there. Moving on. Senku and Chrome's dynamic is also building up to some degree. Like, Chrome really sees himself more as like a apprentice kind of person now. I still would like to see Chrome compete in the grand bout with some kind of science weapon, or if they just give a science weapon to Kinro Ginro, that would be nice too. I just want to see them use science in a combat type scenario. It reminds me of like Accelerator or any of those science shows that kind of do cool things with science and magic at the same time. No magic in the show, but science would be nice to see being used against Magma to like tase him. Said this 3 times before, so I don't want to go into it too much, but another solid addition to the Dr. Stone canon. I feel like if I read the manga, I would finish it in a day probably. I have no idea how many chapters are out, but it seems like the type of thing that I would just gobble up without ever stopping. This is perfect, like right in the strike zone for a science boy like me. I have a just endless fascination with this stuff, and whenever they bring up anything new, it just keeps me completely hooked until the next week. I wish 50 episodes of it were out already so I could watch it all in one go. It's perfect bingeable content to me because it seems like each episode doesn't contain too much, so you have to, ponder on it a lot. You can kind of just swallow it and move on to the next chunk of information. When this eventually does come out in its full, maybe I'll buy the Blu-ray or something because it's so sciencey, so perfectly in my wheelhouse. And just another great episode of the show, episode 11. We're almost at the end of the first arc. I have no doubt that they're going to give her antibiotics. It's good that we kind of have a grander arc to work towards because most of the earlier episodes are just one episode kind of scientific discovery type storylines, and working towards a grander goal is kind of the whole point of the show. We're going 2 million years into the future, building all these things that no one in this time has ever even thought of. So another great episode of Dr. Stone. Don't really know what else to say. I feel like the show is perfectly in its stride now, and everything it does is just great. The pacing is great, and the little emotional beats that we get, like Suika seeing and like the craftsman making stuff, are just so cool that this show is probably like the number one most recommendable show to a general audience of this season. So that's it for this week. Episode 11 of Dr. Stone. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next video.